presents, I guess. And actually, let me do one thing before I forget. I'm going to start the recording. If I can, oh, the recording has started already. That's great. Okay. All right. So we have an exciting evening, a number of presenters. So let me get going and not waste your time hearing me. Okay, so some special news. Unfortunately, because of basically the tragedy that Hurricane Ian has wrought on the West Coast, the 2022 Audubon Assembly was canceled. It was scheduled to be held in Fort Myers area. And as many of you know, that area has been devastated. The assembly has been canceled officially. You should have received, if you registered, a refund. And you should have also, if you did register for or made reservations at the Luminary Hotel, you should have also received a cancellation notice from them. If you haven't, you should probably inquire and find out about your reservation as well. However, Audubon Florida has scheduled some free online events that were to have happened during the assembly. And you can see them there. They're October 12th, 27th, and November 2nd. The registration information is below, and Natasha will be putting that into the chat. So you'll be able to go there and register for those events if you'd like to. So I hopefully we'll get to see you there. Unfortunately, the assembly isn't happening, but hopefully at some point we can support that area. And if you haven't made a donation to the efforts going on there, it's tragic, as all of you know. I don't have to tell you. You've all been watching the news, I'm sure. All right. So we have a book discussion coming up. It's A World on the Wing. It's by Scott Weidensaul, and it will be led by our own Blue Kaufman, who is, for them, somebody who may know, she works for Conservation Florida. The book discussion will take place in 2 segments on Tuesday, December 13th, and Tuesday, December 20th. It is open to current Audubon Everglades members. And the reason we only open it to our members is because there's limited space. So we feel that our members should have a priority. I will be sending out an email later this week, probably this weekend, about it, so you can register. However, if you do want to email Blue Kaufman at 2@gmail, you can do that. And Natasha will be putting her email address into the chat as well. It's a great book, by the way. I've read it, and it's the who, what, where, what, why, bird migration, told in a wonderful way. Scott Weidensaul is a great writer. We have a number of field trips coming up. As you can see, the birding season is get up and go right now. Whoops, sorry about that. As many of you know, migrants are returning. We've already had 2 field trips this past weekend, and we are continuing for the rest of the month. You can see some of them listed there. The 5th at Paleo Hammock, another also at Jonathan Dickens State Park. 11th on the 8th at Frenchman's Forest Natural Area, a great migrant sighting area. We're doing 2 big sits this year. My wife and I, Mary, are leading one at Green Cay. That's from 8 to 2 on the 8th. And Linda McCandless is leading one on the 8th as well, from 8 to 11:30 at Peaceful Waters. The one at Green Cay is a larger area, so it's families and people with disabilities are welcome. It's because there's room for you to be there and participate in that, so we'd love to have you. And again, it's at the northwest side of the boardwalk. The one at Peaceful Waters is in the gazebo, which is in the middle of the boardwalk there. On the 13th, there's a short walk. You see, it's only 45 minutes at the FAU Jupiter Huckshorn Arboretum. That's a wonderful little birding habitat. It's a short walk, but you never know what you see there. And they've seen some rarities there. So if you're up in that area and you want to participate in that, I highly recommend it. On the 22nd, Wellington Environmental Preserve with an E at the end, it should be. And I think our own Clive is leading that one, if I'm not mistaken. And then on the 28th, Wakota-Hatchee. And then on the 29th, Orchard View Park. You can see information for those on our calendar, as well as at our Eventbrite site. And that information is you can see that on the bottom there. And Natasha will be putting that into the chat as well. So we hope to see you at some of these field trips. Get out there and see some birds. Volunteer opportunities. We're still looking for a program coordinator or assistant coordinator. We need someone to really help us out with these programs that you're seeing tonight, helping us to find speakers, communicate with speakers, be part of this process. You'll really get some firsthand knowledge of what we do as an organization participating in the program, a coordinator, assistant coordinator position, and you also get to have a say in some of the people that we have, on these evenings. So please, if you have an interest, please volunteer. Community outreach event staffers, we're going to be doing that. We're already starting that shortly. And plants for birds, garden stewards. We will be planting our second garden in the winter up at Bush Wildlife Sanctuary. So we need volunteers to help out with those gardens. So please volunteer, and we look forward to seeing you participate in some of our activities. Become a friend, membership of Audubon Everglades. Again, there are some membership privileges, as in, for example, be able to be part of the book discussion. There are certain field trips only open to members or member prioritized. The photography group is only open to members. So please join. You can join at audubonEverglades.org. We'd love to have you be part of us. Remember, we're an all-volunteer organization. All the money that we that is contributed through membership goes actually into the organization. Nothing goes outside it. Audubon Everglades Photography Group on Thursday, October 13th. We have macro to micro photography with bridge cameras. For those of you who have bridge cameras or are thinking of buying one and tired of lugging around that heavy SLR with that 1:400 or 500 zoom lens, you might be interested in attending and seeing our wonderful speaker, Simon Talsman, present on doing macro to micro with a bridge camera. I know many of you out there have bridge cameras and take wonderful photos. I mean, I am amazed at some of the photography that bridge camera users get, and they don't have to lug around that 7.5 to 10 pound piece of camera that I do. So I admire you for what you do, and hopefully some of you will be attending that workshop. To get more information, please email Mary, that's my wife, by the way, for those of you who don't know, at aepgregister@audubonEverglades.org, and Natasha will be putting that into the chat as well. So on November 1st, we have a really special, interesting program. We have Freya McGregor, who is the coordinator of Birdability, and Birdability tries to make birding accessible to everyone, as you can see. The subject matter of the talk will be birdability, because birding is for everybody and everybody. So no one is excluded from birding. I think he'll really be excited about what Birdability is doing, about their outreach program, and about how, perhaps how we as an organization can also join with them and do more to make birding accessible to our members and our community as well. So please join us on November 1st. You'll be able to view all our past presentations, including this one, if you go to our Audubon Everglades YouTube channel. And that's a long address, but if you just go to YouTube and type in Audubon Everglades channel, you'll find it. But Natasha will put that into the chat. Thank you, Natasha. And so you'll be able to see it there as well. So again, all past presentations, including this one, are there. Questions. If you have questions, please put them in the chat at the tab at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to get to as many as possible for all our presenters this evening, and who I know love your questions. And you guys ask some great challenging questions, and I'm sure they'll be just as good tonight. And so that brings us to our first presentation, Clive and Cece on the bird of the month. And this is a beautiful little bird this month, and I can't wait to see it. Clive, take it away. Clive and Cece, take it away.
All right. Give us a quick minute here.
Scott, you want to turn off your PowerPoint?
Oh, yes. Yes, I will. I am off.
All right, here we go. All right, so our bird of the month is the beautiful, beautiful eastern bluebird. And I was mentioning earlier in my conversation with Scott that Cece and I are very fortunate in that we have family in Tennessee that we go up to see almost every year. And this is definitely one of our favorite birds to see when we get up to Tennessee. Just such a gorgeous, gorgeous bird. The one we're looking at here on our screen is a male, and you can tell from the vibrant color, blue, on the back of the bird as well as on its head, and the beautiful chestnut color on the breast area as well, and all that white on that belly area. Really, really gorgeous bird. For comparison, and let's see here. Um, for comparison, we've got the male and female together, and you can see the male on the right, female on the left. The females are more gray on the back and the head area. Still remnants of that brownish color on the chest and tinges of blue on the wings and the tail. Again, even though her colors are not as vibrant as the male, it actually shows that they're very, very beautiful birds. This schematic I put in here because I wanted to show the difference between the Western bluebird, which is the Mexicana, and the Eastern bluebird. The Eastern are the ones in the middle. The one at the bottom is the female Western, and this way you can have a little bit of comparison. And the one flying away at the upper right-hand corner, that is supposed to be a male Western. That drawing is a little, there's a little error in that one because the male Western has a completely blue head. Where you see on the throat, on the Eastern, it's the chestnut goes up into that throat area. On the Western bluebird, that's all blue. And so we just wanted to put this here for a little bit of comparison. Now, as far as range goes, the Eastern bluebird actually has the largest of the three bluebirds in North America. You can see there the Eastern bluebird covers pretty much all of Eastern North America. But what's quite interesting in regards to range is that it actually extends all the way to Nicaragua, all the way south into Nicaragua. So our Eastern bluebird gets around quite a bit. The species spreads out quite a bit. And the other two that I mentioned very, very briefly is the Western bluebird and the mountain bluebird, which if you've not had a chance to see that mountain bluebird, it is stunning. It's sky blue. The male is solid sky blue all the way around, and just quite a beautiful bird. The habitat that our Eastern bluebirds tend to prefer is open country, with pinelands, pastures. A lot of these open areas need to have, by way of necessity for the birds, snags and trees where they can perch low to the ground to look for insects. But also a lot of these snags and wooden posts will quite often provide nesting cavities for these birds. But we'll get into nesting a little further. Again, in regards to habitats, meadows, field edges, along roadsides, forest openings, golf courses, suburban parks and backyards, places like that are all quite attractive to our Eastern bluebird. As far as their diet goes, in spring and summer, it is made up predominantly of insects, quite a variety of insects, as a matter of fact, bugs and beetles, caterpillars, crickets, grasshoppers. And outside of the insect realm, they will even take spiders, earthworms, and snails. Now, during the fall and winter months, when those critters become quite scarce, in the lower right-hand corner, you will see the bird eating a berry. And so their diet actually changes quite a bit during the fall and winter months. They focus on fruits and berries like blueberries, sumac, mistletoe, black cherries, honeysuckle, pokeweed, and just a large variety of berries and fruits that are available to them because of the scarcity of insects during that time of year. Something quite interesting I discovered too in regards to their diet. They have some oddities thrown in where these birds have been observed from time to time feeding on tree frogs, salamanders, small lizards, small snakes, and even shrews. That's right, shrews. And the little mammal, and it's amazing that you look at these birds and it's just incredible to think that they would tackle a shrew or a small snake or lizard. But yes, they actually do add those to the diet. They're quite opportunistic. So whenever those things are available, they will seize the opportunity to give them a try. As far as nesting is concerned, courtship begins in the springtime, and these birds are cavity nesters, so they tend to focus on habitats that have quite a few snags, fence posts, old trees, but they also spend quite a bit of time making use of man-made nest structures like nest boxes. And there are eastern bluebird trails that people have established where several nest boxes are placed on fence posts where these birds generally nest. And most of those times, each of those nest boxes are occupied by nesting pairs of bluebirds. So quite the sight. Pair bonding at the beginning of the nesting season involves the male courting, singing, displaying to attract a female to his territory. Once an interested female shows up, he actually, there's a lot of wing fluttering and strutting that goes on. And part of his display and attraction for the female, he will occasionally grab nesting material and utilize a particular nest cavity or nest box that he prefers, and he'll fly in and out of that box with the nesting material. He doesn't really change it, but he goes in and out of the box, indicating to the female that that's the box that he's sort of selected with the hopes that she'll like it too. And typically once the female enters that nest box with him, that solidifies the pair bond between the birds. It is at that point that the female then takes over nest building. The male really does not participate in nest building at all, other than initiating it. But it is the female, once she has selected the male as her partner, she will then commence with the nest building, utilizing pine needles and twigs, grasses, even animal hair like horse hairs and things of that sort. People have found turkey feathers that actually make up part of the nesting as well. 4 to, if I remember, 4 to 7 eggs, on average 4 to 5 eggs, but they generally will lay anywhere between 2 and 7 eggs. The eggs are generally pale blue to sometimes white in color, but there are no markings on the eggs. Incubation takes typically 13 to 16 days, and it is done solely by the female. Now, during that time, however, the males are defending the territory from other cavity nesters, including not only other bluebirds, but also birds like house sparrows and starlings, great crested flycatchers and the like that are looking for cavities to nest in as well. Now, once incubation is completed, the male does get involved in with the female in feeding the young, in raising and taking care of the young. And usually by about 18 to 19 days, the young fledge and leave the nest. One bit of information regarding nesting too, they're usually, depending on food availability and nest sites, they will have anywhere from 2 to 3 broods per nesting season. And it is not unusual for juvenile from an earlier set of hatchlings earlier that season to assist in feeding and caring for the last batch of young. I found that quite interesting. To close, let me just read a little tidbit of conservation note. Oh, let me see, I believe, okay, I almost forgot these. The fact that they nesting, you can see some of the eggs there in the upper left-hand corner, one of the babies from a nest, and of course the parent bird feeding a very greedy young right there with quite a few mealworms. And I found out for people who are fortunate in attracting bluebirds to feeders, mealworms are the tickets. Apparently the bluebirds can't resist the mealworms, and they try to collect as many of those to feed their young. You can see those lower photos, and this last one I put in here, you get a good look at not only the mealworm, but also the markings of the baby bird, the juvenile bird, heavily spotted, looking very, very different in plumage from the adult male and female. In regards to conservation note, eastern bluebird populations increased between 1966 and 2015, according to North American Breeding Bird Survey. Partners in Flight estimates a global breeding population of 22 million, with 86% spending at least some part of the year in the United States, 22% in Mexico, and 1% breeding in Canada. Now, eastern bluebird populations fell in the early 20th century as aggressive introduced species, such as the starlings and house sparrows, made available nest holes increasingly difficult for the bluebirds to hold on to. In the 1960s and 70s, establishment of bluebird trails and other nest box campaigns alleviated much of the competition, especially after people began using nest boxes designed to keep out larger starlings. And just one last bit of information, the oldest record, the oldest eastern bluebird on record was actually 10 years, 6 months old, which is pretty amazing when you think about the size of this bird. This bird, this 10-year-old bird was banded in New York in May of 1989 and was found dead in South Carolina in November of 1999. So from 89 to 99, 10 years, 6 months old. And that's it for our eastern bluebirds. And so we will take any questions that have come in.
Thanks, Clive. That was great. By the way, a number of people commented, Kay Gates and Gwen Gertie Hayes commented on how beautiful the photos were that you used.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing those.
Sure.
If you have questions, please put them in the chat. One question so far is asked by Kay Gates. Are we too far south to entice bluebirds here?
Yes, unfortunately, some of the records do show that in the winter, there have been sightings of bluebirds as far south as Key West, but obviously it's quite a rarity to get them coming this far south.
And I think I remember, and someone else can correct me out there if I'm wrong. I think we've had a sighting last year in the western part of the county. I think up in the Corbett area. There were some bluebird sightings as well.
Very good. I've learned years ago that the birds don't read the field guides, so they show up just about any place they want to.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I have no other questions. Again, another comment on great presentation. Oh, we have a question. Margot Booth, who is a naturalist, I know, always need to put up 2 nesting boxes at a time. Is that your experience also, Clive?
I have heard that it's okay to do that. It actually enhances the opportunity for nesting because it gives the birds a selection or a variety or some options to choose from. So yes, it's actually a better idea to put up 2 or 3, but you want to have them spaced because once a pair selects a nest box, they won't tolerate another pair being too close to them.
And Debbie Smith says on a trip with Tropical to Miami, the Everglades, we saw some nesting in slash pine trees. So again, they're not reading the
yeah, that's right,
field guides.
Very, very good. That's great. That's great.
Wonderful. I was wondering, you said that there are as many as 7 potential bluebirds in a nest. So that seems like a lot to me. I could be wrong from what I know about songbirds. And so of that 7, do you have any idea of how many might typically survive?
I'm confused. When did I
thought you said 2 to 7. Did I hear you incorrectly?
2 to 7 nests, young?
Within a nest.
Oh, yeah. On average, it's actually 4 to 6, but they can have as few as 2 and as many as 7.
I see. Okay. And
yeah, and the survival rate is usually pretty good because the pairs generally select locations that produce a lot of insects. What increases the number of eggs is food availability. There's a direct link between egg production and food availability. So the more insects that are available for the adult birds to feed on, the higher number of eggs would be produced.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Well, that makes a lot of sense. So thank you so much, Clive. Great present. Oh, I have 2. Wow, that's last minute.
I'll take them.
All right, so Ann Wiley says, we used to see them at the hole in the donut. The hole in the donut, I love it. In the glades with fair regularity, but
Wow.
Now not for a couple of years.
It just goes to show again, that depending on nest availability and other variables or factors that are influencing the local populations, that will determine just how far and to what lengths these birds will go to find proper habitat for nesting.
And Shelley points out that, Shelley, who is our purple martin expert, points out that the bluebirds, this is Shelley Rosenberg, are native competitors and will attempt to breed in purple martin houses. Purple martin landlords often put up bluebird nesting boxes alongside purple martin houses to help them coexist. So
that is so interesting to hear that, because again, most of the research that I've done, very few, if any, indicate that the birds will nest this far south. It shows them nesting just around the northern portion of Lake O and beyond that. But as far as nesting this far south, it's atypical. But again, the birds don't read the field guides, so yes, they'll show up any place that's available.
And Shelley comments on what you said as well, reiterating, true, not this far south, landlords north of us. Right. And Robert Brown also confirms that another place, if you want to see bluebirds, they nest year round in Tallahassee. So
Oh, very good.
get up to our seat of government if you want to uh, get in that muck up there of government, and you can see nesting bluebirds all year round.
All right.
Okay.
That's
Well, thank you
great.
so much, Clive and Cece. That was a great presentation as always, and we look forward to next month. And I'm not sure what the bird is yet, and I won't spill the secret anyway. So we will see you then.
Thank you, guys.
Clive.
Glad you enjoyed it.
All right, I'm just going to share my screen, and then I'm going to turn the rest of the evening over. Whoops. I'm going to turn the rest of the evening over to Natasha to lead. And let's see, where is that screen? There it is. Okay. All right. So Natasha Warwick is going to take over from here. She's going to talk to you about Tarpon Cove. She'll be introducing our next two presenters and fielding questions and closing the evening. Thank you, everybody. And hopefully I'll get to see you out there at the big sit or at some of the bird walks that we have this year. Natasha, it's all yours.
All right, good evening, everyone. I did unmute myself. All right, so there was a question in the chat earlier about the field trips. I will say all those field trips were for October.
Yes.
When you click on the Eventbrite link, it will take you and it says the October date. Sorry, the slide said November. All right, so we have a very exciting event coming up on October 15th. It is a partner event with Palm Beach County Environmental Resources Management to remove vegetation on some of the spoil islands that were created that I'm sure a lot of you are aware of. That these islands have been used by black skimmers, least terns, and American oyster catchers the past several years for nesting, which is a really big deal. So Eric Anderson is with us today from Palm Beach County. He's like the father of all these spoil islands. Eric, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, you can talk a little bit about the islands, and then I'll tell everybody how to get more information when we're done. When you're done.
Okay. So Natasha, thank you for having me. I don't know. I guess I'm embarrassed about the father of these islands. I've just been very blessed to be with Palm Beach County for the past 16 years, and been involved with restoring Lake Worth Lagoon. And I don't want to take up too much of your time today, but I remember meeting out with Ricardo when we were doing one of these things, and he goes, we could get skimmers and least terns nesting on these islands. And I'm like, you're kidding me, Ricardo. And sure enough, it's happened. So Tarpon Cove, I'm just going to briefly just kind of give you an overview where it is, why we're doing it. But we have 4 new islands out in Lake Worth Lagoon, and they are not only creating mangrove and fisheries habitat, but they're creating habitat for birds. A lot of numbers here: 34 acres of seagrass, 2.7 acres of intertidal habitat, 2.1 acres of oysters, and 0.3 acres of bird habitat. I'll be honest, when I first started designing this, I was like, we're not going to get birds here. Let's just keep the bird habitat small. So keep that number. Some numbers is 5,000 cubic yards of sand, 28,000 tons of rock. That's a lot. How do we do this? In 2016, we got some state money, 1.6 from the state legislative, matched by Palm Beach County. And then our friends at FWC have been very generous to this project, and NOAA and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, another $2.1 million to the project. In addition, we've acquired materials of opportunity at no cost to the county. The project originally started in 2018 with help from Florida Inland Navigation District. They started placing sand out in the waterway in the location of 2 of our islands. As you can see, the contract price of just dredging and placing that sand is $4.2 million for 84,000 cubic yards of sand. Extrapolate that over the project, we needed $500,000. This project could be very expensive, but again, partnerships are where we form. And during that exercise, these are supposed to be mangrove islands. They were not supposed to be birds. Our American oyster catchers decided that this would be a new home. And in 2019, it was kind of made us say, well, maybe that Dr. Seuss book, Are You My Mama, is really the Lake Worth Lagoon's expertise or call sign. That was the very first year Natasha and Ricardo actually helped us go out and ban those birds. I believe we banded 2 that year, if I'm not mistaken. You could see the nesting site, and you could see how close it is to the construction. Actually, is my that year we had 2 birds. Other lessons learned is we're supposed to have 5 mangrove islands. The last mangrove island to the south here, we realized there was an FP&L easement, so things had to change. And we left a pile of sand out there, and that's when in 2020, when our first black skimmers nested. 2 pairs, 4 birds came. We're like, these birds have been here for a while. We were working with Natasha at the time and Paul Davis, and said, our skimmers from a nearby rooftop nesting disappeared. And I was like, well, they've been out at Tarpon Cove for a while. And we got close one day and we saw that there was 4 heads and 6 eggs total under those birds, and they ended up hatching 4 and fledging 4 that year. So again, that Dr. Seuss is that construction my mama. So being very fortunate, one great thing about Palm Beach County ERM is adaptive management. We're really always watching what's going on out there. I don't know that I'm the father of these birds. I think I'll maybe say the uncle, and we're just doing a really good job of watching what's going on. So one of the big numbers here to look at is we went from 0.3 acres of bird habitat to 1.56 acres of bird habitat just at Tarpon Cove alone. We increased our mangroves and intertidal habitat from 2.7 to 4.2 acres. We are nearly complete. To this date, we've acquired about 370,000 cubic yards of sand. We need about 124,000 remaining to finish up the project. And we need about 13,000 tons of rock to create the oyster habitat. So just kind of going through the phases, May 2019 with Florida Inland Navigation District sand. You could see, and then a year later, we graded the islands down. We left 2 nesting mounds on there, rock on the outside, nesting mounds for birds, and then mangrove habitat on the shoreline. 2 years later, you can see the mangroves growing up, but we also have vegetation growing up on those bird islands, which is what I need your help with. In addition, this last phase, we created a larger bird spit, trying to keep access to the waterway. We've created some more sandy shorelines and created oyster habitat around this. I am hoping that this will be our new bird mound where the least terns and black skimmers will nest in the future. But you know what? Nature's a funny thing, and you can't always count on them. I'm not going to go into all these details, but when we first started seeing American oyster catchers nest at Snook Islands in 2005 to 2014. At the time, it was kind of just an afterthought. Well, we're creating habitat. This is good. They were bouncing around. They're nesting on the riprap, any high spots within those islands. But it wasn't until 2014, again, that theory of is this excavator my mama? When we started placing a pile of sand out there, and our second pair of oyster catchers nested on this site. We worked with FWC. We allowed construction to go on. They didn't seem to be impacted by the excavators, but they did not like when the people got out. Ever since, we've had successful nesting at Bryant Park. Our first site, when I worked with Ricardo and Aaron at FWC, I was like, I think we need to make some bird nesting areas at Grassy Flats. And Aaron at the time, who helped us get quite a bit of money, said, "We can't make any additional habitats. We're supposed to create mangroves and oysters and seagrass." And luckily, we wore her down, and she understood the benefits. And with our funding partners, we were able to build 2 nesting mounds. 2015, March 2015, once we left with our excavators, a pair of our second pair of oyster catchers, we believe it's the one from Snook Islands, the original pair, came over and said, "Thank you very much. We're going to nest here now." And you could see ever since 2015 have been nesting on these islands. We've also had successful nesting of the first 2 years of least terns within this location. Snook Islands, our third pair of successful nesting oyster catchers since 2017. And then Tarpon Cove, our fourth nesting pair. And in 2020 is when we first saw black skimmers. 2021, we saw black skimmers and least terns. And 2022, we had a banner year of black skimmers and least terns. As you could see, they've shifted from this, what I call the FP&L sand spit, to our new construction island here. This year, we had about 37 black skimmer adults show up. We estimate about 12 nests. In September, we had 106 black skimmers on the site. We had counted as many as 80 least terns with at least 32 nests here. Some just pictures over the years of 2020. Some of our chicks, everybody loves chicks, right? So black skimmer, American oyster catcher, chicks in 2020. 2022, a lot of these pictures were taken by Benji Stute at Palm Beach County ERM. We've even seen a roseate spillbill in 2022 and 2021. You could see the birds feeding their young. And to me, this is like one of the most exciting things is not only we're creating habitat, but there's a food source for them. They're protected, and you know, they're thriving in this location. In 2022, some just more pictures of the least terns and the black skimmers. In the past, we've always had volunteers plant mangroves, and you know, everyone's always, "Hey, how do I volunteer? How can we do more?" I'll be honest, we've kind of neglected a lot of these bird islands over the years. We've had volunteers come out with kayaks and pull. This is a new program that we've started just last year. In the past, we treated with chemicals. We've hired contractors to go out there. And even this past year, we've done fire. I really want to develop this, an outreach program more where twice a year, each island, volunteers go out and help us pull the weeds. This past year, we got students from Palm Beach Day Academy they helped install oyster reefs, and they did help remove some vegetation in February before the nesting. So this is what it looks like before. I didn't take a picture of after, but we're looking to hold an event on October 15th. The goal of the event would be meet at Curry Park. Palm Beach County could transport between 9 and 10 volunteers with our Sea Ark. It's essentially a large John boat. Hopefully to have the first wave of volunteers get to the island around 9:30. A second group of volunteers, we could meet at Monceau Park, which is just across the from Tarpon Cove. The only challenge with that is we just have to ask volunteers to climb down a ladder to access a boat, and your feet may get a little wet, but your feet may get wet either way. And hopefully return you to Monceau Park around 11 and back to Curry Park between 11 and 11:15. So hopefully I stayed within my 15 minutes. Really just looking to develop a program where we get bird enthusiastic people out to these islands to keep it nice and sandy and clean for to continue to entice the black skimmers and the least terns. And that's all I got.
All right, thank you, Eric. So Scott, if you can share your screen again. We do have an event that we're partnering with Palm Beach County to get some of our Audubon Everglades membership out there to help with this vegetation removal event. If you are interested, please email me. I put my email address in the chat, and I'm keeping a tally of how many people we're expecting. And email me with any questions that you have about the event. It's going to be really cool. And, you know, I've seen it happen. These islands really are amazing habitat for not just seabirds and shorebirds, but we've seen reddish egrets out there, which you don't see very often. So it's going to be a great event, and we hope that we get a good turnout. So thank you, Eric. There are no questions in the chat right now, but if there are any, if you're signing off, Eric, I can email them to you or we can answer them later.
Okay, yeah, there was, I think there's reports of Wilson plovers out there, I think last year, and then just recently this year. I think there's a red knot hanging around the Lake Worth Lagoon too that I've heard reports of. I haven't seen him personally, but yeah, I honestly, I've never thought that birds were going to be the driving factor of these islands, and sure enough, they really are. So just looking to share with people that are enthusiastic about birds. So.
Well, you found your group. Thank you.
Thanks, Natasha.
Yep. All right, with that, I think the next thing on the agenda is to introduce our featured speakers today. So we have a really great presentation tonight by Dilly Hoyt and Laura Nicholson. And I'm just going to do a really quick introduction. These guys have an amazing you know, resume, both of them. So Dilly, she is a very keen traveler and bat enthusiast and has managed to combine those two passions, resulting in an experience researching bats in 4 different continents. She got her bachelor's degree in environmental biology at the University of Nottingham and her master's degree in island biodiversity and conservation at the University of Exeter, where she studied the effects on wildfire on bats in the Mediterranean type ecosystems in Irvine, California. She is aspires to conduct a PhD in tropical bat ecology and conservation in the near future, where she's broadly interested in the effect of land use changes on bat communities. That's very apt for South Florida. Dilly has worked for the Florida Wildlife Research Institute since January 2021 as a field biologist, collecting data for Everglades restoration and bat projects. And she now leads the data analysis for research on the Florida bonneted bat natural roost selection. With her is Laura, who also works for the Fish and Wildlife Commission. She is passionate about science, education, and habitat restoration. She got her bachelor's degree from Rice University in ecology and evolutionary biology with a minor in environmental studies, and has conducted independent research on pollinator ecology in Ecuador, and completed her master's degree at the University of Florida in wildlife ecology and conservation. For her master's, she led a large-scale data collection effort to assess the effects of hydrological restoration on the foraging ecology of Florida bonneted bats and the rest of South Florida bat community, as part of FWRI's project to understand how bats respond to Everglades restoration. So with that, I'm going to please just remind everybody to make sure you're muted during their presentation so there's no interruptions, and please type your questions in the chat. With that, I'll hand it off to you, Dilly and Laura.
Hello, thank you so much, Natasha. We will just get started here and share our screen. All right.
How's that look?
Natasha, can you
It
see
looks
our...
perfect.
Okay, perfect. Just want to make sure. All right.
Brilliant.
So
All
we'll
right,
take it
well,
away.
hi everyone. Thank you all for attending our talk today. First off, we wanted to acknowledge the devastation that Hurricane Ian has caused in this region. And we only hope that everyone is safe, and we're thinking of those that have lost so much. We're really excited to get the opportunity to talk about the mammal with one of the most restricted ranges in North America, the Florida bonneted bat. So the work that we're about to talk about is a culmination of many years of hard work, collaborating with multiple organizations and many dedicated staff members. So we'll start off giving a brief introduction to bats, their diverse diets and morphologies, before then discussing more specifically the bonneted bat and what makes it so special and yet so threatened. So we'll discuss the work we're currently doing on roost selection, and we'll also discuss a project that Laura has devoted the last 3 years of her life to, understanding habitat selection and the effects of hydrologic restoration on Florida's bats. And lastly, Laura will also talk a bit about prescribed burning and its effects on the Florida bonneted bat. So firstly, I'm not going to assume everyone has seen a bat in our audience, because they can be somewhat elusive, especially when you're not paying attention or specifically looking for them. So bats are warm-blooded, they have fur, and they lactate. So this means that bats are mammals, and in fact, they're the only true flying mammal that we have on Earth. So the order of mammals that they belong to is called Chiroptera, where chiro means hand and ptera means wing. So you'll see in this diagram on the bottom right, the bone structure of a human arm and in comparison, a bone structure of a bat wing. So notice how their wings are what form, their bat fingers are what form the wings, pardon. And so they kind of have webbed fingers in a way. So one of my favorite things about bats is just how diverse they are, both in terms of their appearance and their diet. So there's more than 1,400 species of bat. You have insectivorous bats, which eat a whole host of insects, including agricultural pests and disease vectors like mosquitoes. You have frugivorous bats, which are very important seed dispersers. Some species of bat even known to replant forests through pooping seeds throughout the landscape. And then we have the bats you might have heard of, the vampire bat. There are only 3 species of bat that drink blood, and they all exist in Latin America. And lastly, the carnivorous bat. These bats will eat fish, small mammals, and even other bats. So this is all to say that bats come in all shapes and sizes, and that's what makes them incredibly interesting to study. So although bats exist on every continent except for the polar regions, we're going to narrow it down to species of bat that lives exclusively in southern Florida. So there are 13 resident species of bat in Florida, with occasional vagrants, including a ghost-faced bat that is just found in the Keys. And so because of Florida's peninsular location, it has a subtropical climate that leads to differences in species composition as well as behavior. So for example, there are bats in Florida that are active year round, whereas the same species in another state might go into hibernation or torpor. So these differences in behavior is what makes Florida incredibly unique, and is something that bat scientists in Florida are still figuring out as we continue our research. So there's much that's left to be learned. So we are going to focus on this little guy here. This is the Florida bonneted bat, and it belongs to the family Melocidae. So this is also known as the free-tailed bat family. So can you see the 2 little bat butts at the bottom of the slide, and how they have tails that emerge? Not all bats have this type of configuration. In fact, this is what makes this family distinct from other bat families. They have a special ring of cartilage that slides up or down the tail vertebrate by muscular action to stretch or retract the tail membrane. So this gives many species a degree of fine-tuning in their flight maneuvers to rival their day-flying ecological equivalents, such as swifts, swallows, and martins. So as a result, these animals include the fastest flying of all bat species among their number. And this is the Mexican free-tailed bat, which can fly up to 100 miles per hour. So similarly, the Florida bonneted bat is really fast and high flying, but it does have a very restricted range, as seen here in orange. And as a result of this, in 2013, the US Fish and Wildlife declared the species federally endangered, and the IUCN categorized the bat as critically endangered on the red list. This is also due to the fact that we don't have great estimates on its current population size, although it is estimated to be fewer than 1,000 mature individuals. In addition to this, and its already limited range, it is also threatened by continued habitat loss, climate change, such as events just like Hurricane Ian, sea level rise, and is potentially limited by roost availability, which I'll speak a little bit more about later on. So very little is known about the Florida bonneted bat. We have many data gaps that are slowly being filled. Prior to the University of Florida and FWC efforts, we had very poor understanding of where their range was, where they occurred within that range, what they ate, where they roosted, what times they were active, how many individuals were in a colony. We pretty much knew next to nothing. And so it's incredibly difficult to conserve a species that you know so little about. So that was one of the first things we sought out when conducting research, was to figure out where their homes were, where are their roosts. And so from there, we then figured out, or we were trying to figure out point number 2, so their foraging ecology. So where do they eat? What do they eat? And in addition to this, our boss, Liz Braun, conducted research as part of her postdoc to see what effects prescribed burning had on this species. And then finally, Laura conducted work investigating the effects of hydrological restoration on bats. And so firstly, our primary research objectives were to find roosts. So in 2015, we found only the second known active natural roost since 1979 in a slash pine snag in Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge in the South. Since 2015, we've located a total of 36 natural roosts in 5 properties in different parts of the Florida bonneted bat range. So how have we done this? Initially, we set up many acoustic recorders across Picayune Strand State Forest and the surrounding area, which are located in Southwest Florida and are believed to be a core part of their range. We did this to try to find hotspots of Florida bonneted bat activity. Many species of bat echolocate, meaning that they produce sonar to help them navigate their surrounding environment in the dark, in addition to helping them catch prey during flight. So each bat species has a unique signature call, which differs in shape and frequency and allows us to be able to identify them. So the Florida bonneted bat has a very low call, which is pretty unique for bats in North America. It is low enough for it to be audible to human ears if you have good hearing. So using acoustic detectors, we're able to identify areas where their calls were detected in high numbers. And we targeted these areas to put up giant mist nets in order to catch these. So these areas were usually over waterways and near forest edges, as these were areas that they seem to occur the most. So these bats are high flying, as I said earlier, and are really difficult to capture using just a net, even though it is a very high net. So my boss Liz, or our boss Liz, experimented with some of the acoustic calls that we had recorded and played these calls back using an acoustic lure while these mist nets were up. And this acoustic lure would then lure them in into these nets and allow us to capture them. And so we would then collect a lot of data when we captured these bats, such as the bat's weight, its sex, and reproductive status. And if it met our criteria of being a non-pregnant adult Florida bonneted bat, we attached a collar onto it. So you'll see the bat on the left there. I put a little pearl necklace image on top of it. So we often refer to these collars as being pieces of jewelry that we adorn these bats with temporarily. And so these kind of collars are called breakaway collars. And that's because they're fastened using biodegradable suture, as indicated in that arrow there. And that comes apart after 3 to 4 weeks. So the transmitters themselves have a month-long battery, and that gives us enough time to monitor the bat's movement and locate the the roost, until either the collar comes off or the battery dies. And once the collar is attached, the search begins. So we release the bat, and it flies away into the night. And the following day, we'll often rely on the help of our aerial radio tracking team that normally radio track Florida panthers from the skies, but they kindly help us locate our bats when needed, as the swamps are really difficult to navigate through because of the dense vegetation. It's really difficult to get signal, as there's a lot of bounce back from that signal. But although it has, we have managed to successfully do it a couple of times on foot before, but it's far, far easier searching in the skies. So once we do get a coordinate from the planes, we set out on foot to the nearest access point and head into the swamp and find the roost. Simple. That is much easier said than done. Navigating the swamp offers many challenges. It certainly helps when you have a fantastic group of passionate, kind of crazy people that make the experience so much more fun. So I'm not sure I would have survived the swamp with my amazing teammates, in particular, this guy in the middle, Jonas, who's disappearing into the swamp right there. And here you'll see us actually walking out to one of our roost sites. So you'll see the swamp is particularly challenging, especially during the wet season. So after all the wading and bushwhacking and swimming sometimes, the signal from our receivers often guides us to a roost. So this is a photo of a roost that we found last year, which was occupied by 8 individuals. So note how there's a really large cavity within the tree there. The bat will occupy these cavities, which are created by woodpeckers. So this is another example of a tree that we found last year. Once we find a tree, we'll go out at dusk and watch an emergence. We'll bring with us an acoustic detector to detect their calls as they fly out the roost, and also a thermal camera, which will help us see them as they emerge during the darkness. So it allows us to count how many bats come out of the tree and get an estimate of the roost size too. So here's a couple of bats that are flying out through some thermal camera footage. And then here are some examples of trees that bonneted bats have used in the past. You'll see they're often not the most sturdy or pretty homes. So at a glance, we have found 36 natural roosts so far. The roosts are within 2 main habitat types. We have the pine flatwoods, which are further north. You'll see there's 2 clusters there. And then we have the cypress swamps, or the freshwater forested areas. And so if we kind of zoom into the swamp areas in the south, you can see just how far these guys fly. So in yellow there, you'll see the yellow points are the mist netting sites. So that's where we captured individuals. And all of those red and blue points are Florida bonneted bat roosts. And so those orange circles around those roosts indicate sites where we have caught a Florida bonneted bat, released it, and actually tracked it back to a roost within 500 meters of where we actually captured it. Whereas all of these arrows that are now appearing indicate all of the trajectories that these Florida bonneted bats have flown since we caught the bat and tracked it back to its roost. So the blue arrows indicate males that switched roosts during tracking. So that allowed us to find two roosts for the price of 1. And interestingly, all bats captured in this degraded site here, this is Picayune, which Laura is going to be talking more about. All of the bats captured in this area that's undergoing restoration traveled to the adjacent intact freshwater forested wetland right here called Fakahatchee Strand. And then just as a quick little plot for you guys, we were comparing flight distances between males and females caught in this area, and we found that females fly quite a bit further than males. Go ladies. And then the fun begins once we locate a roost. So once we find a roost, we conduct vegetation surveys on it in the 15 meters directly surrounding the roost. And so this is in order to characterize the vegetation community in order to figure out what these bats prefer, so we can better conserve their roosting sites and habitats. And so things that we measure is the vegetation community, the density, the canopy cover of these areas, among many other variables that we try to collect to understand its habitat preferences. So then we do the same thing all over again, but in the 4 cardinal directions, 300 meters away from the roost plot. And each one of the center trees to start the whole plot is a random tree. So from hundreds of hours spent measuring thousands of trees, we can then compare random vegetation plots and the roost vegetation plot. And what we've found so far, although we're still collecting data, what we found so far is that these bats select both fatter and taller trees that are taller above the canopy than the surrounding area, as you'll see in that green box there. What we also found is that they much prefer roost cavities, or cavities that are higher off the floor and that are taller above the canopy than random cavities. And these cavities that they're selecting are also significantly wider than random cavities, which could make sense because they are the largest bat in North America. So these are quite chunky bats, so they're going to require a bit of room as they leave the roost. And so what we also find is that within these swamps, as seen within the plot on the left, they select for areas that have greater airspace volume. So this means lots of space around the tree, basically, which allows bats to come in and out with ease, in addition to having a tree with more solar radiation. So this creates an ideal toasty temperature for the bats that they really like, especially when they're producing pups. They like a very nice warm environment. So the plot on the right shows the pine flatwood trees, and we're finding that they're significantly different between each other. These habitat types are very different. And so we're seeing that the habitat preferences obviously differ between these two very different, distinct habitat types. So within these pine flatwood roosts, we're finding that the amount of free space or airspace within the sub canopy is really important when considering a space to roost. Because with these roost trees within pine flatwoods, their roosts aren't significantly taller than the other trees in the surrounding area, like we see with the swamp bats. What's actually most important is that there's lots of space between these trees, so it's easy for them to come in and out. And so if you're a little confused, that's okay. Hopefully in the next couple of images will help clarify things. So you'll see here, this is a picture of a pine flatwood in Southwest Florida. And notice that there's a lot of space between trees with very little vegetation, which is what we call a high subcanopy airspace. And they tend to like this in these pine flatwoods. Whereas here, and here's the plot for it. And here you'll see in the swamp, the habitat surrounding the roost is very cluttered, and so it's very dense with vegetation and difficult to fly through. And so these bats tend to select for trees that emerge above the canopy and are very easy to access. So it's nice because usually when we're radio tracking, we'll come close to the tree and we'll still be looking for the signal, and we'll just come across a tree that is usually sticks out above the canopy, and we can hedge our bets that that's likely going to be the roost tree. And so lastly, another potentially important factor is hydrology with these bats. So specifically with our swamp bats in Southwest Florida. So here on the right, you'll see a map of the mean water depth surrounding our discovered Florida bonneted bat roosts. So our roosts are here in red, you'll see. And the deeper water is indicated by the dark blue, whereas the more shallow areas are indicated in lighter blue tones. And you'll see that most of our roosts appear in these darker blue areas. And so this is something that we're still investigating and still really looking forward and excited to continue pursuing, as this could be a significant relationship. And lastly, I just wanted to acknowledge all of the roosts, the current known active roosts that we have found so far. And I wanted to draw attention to our most recently discovered roost this year, thanks to our fantastic team, an additional 7, which is amazing. And that's these ones. And now I'm going to hand it off to Laura, who's going to discuss some of our other research projects on the Florida bonneted bat and other Florida bats.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dilly. So moving beyond the roost, we also want to understand the foraging ecology of this enigmatic species, or basically to figure out what kinds of habitats they're using for both flight paths and feeding. So for this objective, we also focused on the Picayune Strand State Forest and the surrounding protected areas. As Dilly mentioned, the site is located in Collier County in Southwest Florida. While it's now known as Picayune Strand State Forest, it's actually the site of a failed development that was slated to become what was then the largest subdevelopment in the world. And while few houses were actually ever built, restoration has been a long road. Efforts to restore the area started in the 1990s and officially began in 2004 to fill the canals and remove the roadways that were built for development. You can see a map of that down in the bottom center. These efforts are still ongoing, and the site currently has a gradient of restoration, as described on this map here, with areas considered unrestored in red, partially restored in yellow, and fully restored in green. The site is also surrounded by several protected areas that we use as reference sites for the study that are noted in blue on the map. And although construction is planned to be completed in only a few years, it will take decades for the vegetation communities to respond to these changes in hydrology. So in order to understand what kinds of habitats the bats prefer, we used acoustic monitoring devices to gather data on the relative activity patterns of these bats across the study area. Acoustics were the methods of choice because the devices are relatively low cost, allow us to cover a wide spatial range, and they passively record calls all night, allowing us to collect lots and lots of data. It was especially relevant for bonneted bats, as they, until recently, were extremely difficult to capture, but they have those really distinct low frequency echolocation calls, as Dilly mentioned. This allows us to identify their calls with relative confidence. Given this, we use ultrasonic detectors and identified calls using a combination of automated and manual validation. We use number of call files per night as an index of bat activity, and number of call files with feeding buzzes per night as an index of foraging activity. And so you might be wondering, what is a feeding buzz in the first place? This is actually a type of call that bats emit when approaching insect prey and indicate that a bat is foraging. It is distinct in form and structure when looking at a spectrograph of the call. So that allows us to easily identify them, particularly as when they're played aloud and slowed down to be able to be really audible. They sound like a little zip, which is basically the bat producing calls faster and faster to target exactly where the insect is to be able to catch and enjoy its dinner. So we knew how we would perform the study, but the next question was where we'd put the acoustic detectors. We had 194 sites. And so we decided to randomly stratify the detector sites across the study areas to capture as much habitat variety as possible. Detectors were deployed for 4 nights at a time, and sampling rounds were spread across the year to account for potential differences in seasonality. Across 2020 and 2021, this totaled over 3,000 nights of sampling and over 1 million call files. Following manual vetting, this resulted in just over 13,000 confirmed bonneted bat call files and almost 500 feeding buzz call files. Also, as Dilly mentioned earlier, this was an extremely rugged environment to work in, and oftentimes the most difficult challenges were as simple as getting to the site in the first place. But it built a lot of character. And as I'm sure all of you know, the weather can be a bit unpredictable at times. So in addition to the acoustic data, we also collected information on a number of predictor variables to determine what it was exactly that was attracting the bats to those areas. This included spatial and vegetation data on these sites to explore the potential influence of site-specific and landscape factors. This also included hydrologic data, where we extracted data from 30 established wells through the online database DB Hydro, run by the South Florida Water Management District, in order to develop predictive models of hydrology for the area. These wells are noted in purple on the map here. To supplement these models, we established 20 additional hydro stations, as we called them, that are shown in purple on that map. Sorry, the wells are in white and the hydro stations are in purple. And these are basically a camera trap paired with a meter stick that we use to provide additional fine scale information on daily changes in water presence and depth. This worked fairly well until the bears discovered them and started having too much fun with what I'm sure they thought were enrichment toys we put out just for them. And so, of course, they invited all their friends to come check it out as well. At least it made checking out the photos a little bit more fun, though. So to analyze these data, we use spatial distribution maps and generalized linear mix models. And as fun as stats is, I'll leave it at that, and I'm happy to chat with anyone who has additional questions about specifics later. Firstly, we want to share the spatial representations of the relative activity of bonneted bats for both general activity on the left here and foraging activity on the right. As you can see, activity varied quite a bit from site to site across the landscape, indicating that they're likely choosing habitats based off specific features for movement and foraging. When looking at the predictors of habitat use and foraging, we saw the same 5 predictor variables come out as important for both general activity and foraging activity from our models. This firstly included vegetation community, where we saw significantly higher activity in the freshwater forested wetlands as compared to the flatwoods, as well as the estuarine wetlands for general activity. We saw a similar relationship with freshwater forested wetlands and flatwoods for the foraging activity. Other predictor variables of importance for both general activity and foraging activity included hydroperiod, or number of days of inundation per year, distance to nearest canal, percent of roadway within a 150-meter buffer of the acoustic sites, and daily average temperature. All relationships were positive, as you can see here. Reflecting on these results, it's clear that this population of bonneted bats is attracted to and preferentially choosing to forage in freshwater forested wetlands. As Dilly mentioned, this habitat is also clearly important for roosting opportunities. It is interesting to note that there was significantly higher activity in this habitat as compared to the flatwoods habitat, which is in contrast to previous work which has associated this bat species with flatwoods. Although this is the first study to directly compare activity across vegetation communities for a bonneted bat population. However, it's also important to note that the importance of flatwoods as roosting habitat and that different populations of bonneted bats may have different habitat preferences. In terms of the canals, we believe that it's possible the bats are using the canals as corridors for movement and as foraging grounds. However, the positive relationship with distance to canal may indicate that the bats are avoiding areas that have been artificially drained by human development adjacent to the canals, and are choosing instead to go to and forage in more natural habitats. But this hypothesis is still currently under further investigation. Furthermore, it's clear from the models that natural presence of water is an important predictor for bonneted bats, with a positive relationship with hydroperiod. There is an established relationship between bats and water. And while we don't know exactly what about hydroperiod is attracting the bats, whether that be providing direct drinking water, supporting favorable vegetation structure, or preferable insect prey communities, it appears to be an important predictor for this species. And finally, the positive relationship with percentage of open roadways within buffers of acoustic detectors may indicate that bonneted bats are using these long open areas as corridors for movement, as well as foraging opportunities along the forest edges. It is possible that there are greater insect resources along these edges, as noted in other studies. However, it's important to note that these roads are not what you typically think of when you think of roadways. Most are simply old road scars on the landscape that have been converted to open prairie areas, as you can see on the bottom right. So it's important to keep that in mind when considering this variable and limiting the applicability beyond this context. An additional facet of this project was to explore specifically how bonneted bats, in addition to the rest of the bat community, may fare in response to the ongoing restoration I mentioned earlier. So for this aspect of the study, our objectives included, firstly, to explore the effects of hydrologic restoration on greater bat diversity. Secondly, we wanted to explore how hydrologic restoration affects the bat community overall. And finally, we wanted to look specifically at bonneted bats to see how they would be likely to respond to the effects of restoration. So these are the 11 species found in the area of South Florida where we did the study. In order to make generalizations about species within this community, we separated the species found in this region into 3 main species groups, or guilds, based on the aspect ratio and wing loading associated with each species. And what are these terms, you may ask? Aspect ratio and wing loading are factors commonly used in ecomorphological studies and are related to the wing sizes of bats. These morphological features have important implications for what habitats these bat species choose to forage in and use. Bats with lower aspect ratio and wing loading are generally slower, smaller bats that can maneuver more easily through cluttered environments such as forests, and include species such as tricolored bats and Rafinesque's big-eared bats. Bats with higher aspect ratio and wing loading include bats such as the Florida bonneted bat and the Brazilian free-tailed bat, or the Mexican free-tailed bat, also known as, which are larger, faster flying bats that are adapted to foraging in more open environments. Moving forward, I'll refer to these groups as the low, medium, and high guilds. As you can see, the medium guild is kind of somewhere in between those. So the methods for these questions were the same as what we use for the habitat use study, but with an emphasis specifically on the restoration zones. In terms of results, I first want to share this non-metric multidimensional scaling ordination plot of community composition, which demonstrates the significant differences in community composition among the restoration zones. You can see how the bat communities of the unrestored and partially restored zones are quite similar on the left from being so close together on the plot, whereas the restored zone appears more similar to the reference zone on the right. So you can kind of see this gradient of restoration there on the plot. In terms of diversity, we see the highest diversity and evenness in the reference zone, with significantly higher values for both diversity and evenness in the restored and reference zones as compared to the unrestored and partially restored zones. In terms of spatial activity, we can see that the patterns also differ among guilds across the study region. Focusing on restoration zone in particular, we see the highest activity in the reference zone for the bats in the low guild, which is in contrast to the other two guilds. For bats in the medium guild, we see more mixed results with the highest activity in both the unrestored and restored zones. For the bats in the high guild, which includes the Florida bonneted bat, as I mentioned, we can see the highest activity is predicted to be in the partially restored zone as well as the unrestored zone. For bonneted bats, specifically, we ran generalized linear mixed models focused specifically on the restoration zones. And not only did we find it actually to be a significant predictor, but it was found to be significantly higher activity in the restored zone as compared to the unrestored zone, as well as reference zone as compared to the unrestored zone. So for foraging activity, we also found significantly higher activity in the restored zone compared to unrestored zone, which was in contrast to the high guild as previously predicted. So reflecting upon these initial questions and our first objective, it appears that likely that the restoration will benefit bat diversity in the future, as we saw the highest diversity in the reference and restored zones, which is pretty exciting and fits with the greater literature exploring restoration and diversity. In terms of our second question, investigating the impact of restoration on specific guilds, as I predicted, there were mixed results. It appears that bats in the low guild will benefit from the restoration, while bats in the medium and high guilds may potentially have neutral or negative effects from the restoration. But finally, focusing specifically on Florida bonneted bats, we found that despite being in the high guild, it appears that the restoration is having a positive influence on bonneted bat activity. So this demonstrates how having morphological similarities within a guild doesn't necessarily mean that individual species will have the same patterns. And so in this case, the bonneted bat had unique behaviors from other species within the guild. And so it emphasizes the importance of species-specific studies, especially in the case when they're endangered. So although I predicted we'd see the highest bonneted bat activity in the reference sites, due to a lag in recovery we see generally for vegetation communities following a restoration effort, these results may be indicating that the changes in hydrology that have already occurred may be directly influencing the current behavior of the species and drawing them into the restored zones. So all in all, collecting these data for this project was no easy feat, and teamwork and positivity were absolutely essential throughout the duration of the project. It is a highly diverse, rugged ecosystem with many complex interactions that we are continuing to unravel. In terms of future work, further analysis is needed to compare use on and off the canals directly to target whether bats are actively using the canals, and is another component of this project we are currently conducting. Additionally, sampling of insect communities, especially within the canopy strata level and across the hydrologic spectrum and vegetation communities, would help explain this important link between water, vegetation, and bat activity. And finally, further work exploring the drivers of activity of bonneted bats should be conducted for other populations across the range to analyze the generalizability of our results for this species. So moving on to something a little hotter. This is an additional area of research that our team has explored. And so we're basically trying to understand how prescribed fire affects bonneted bat activity. And we want to investigate both the short-term and long-term effects of fire on these bats. So the following studies I will be discussing concerning fire were led by our PI, Dr. Liz Bronda-Torres. So if you have any specific questions about the studies, we'd be happy to put you in touch with her following the talk. So as many of you know, fire is a critically important topic here in Florida. We have the highest lightning strike frequency in the country, and thus the landscape is adapted with fire. Fire-dependent vegetation communities and prescribed burning programs are prevalent across the state, which includes the limited range of the Florida bonneted bat. Fire is an especially important issue in South Florida, as there can be areas of extremely high vegetation density from lack of burning, invasive plants, and hydrologic change. All this can lead to changes in biological communities and increased risk of wildfire. So for both of these objectives, we use acoustic survey methods similar to the previously described studies. So to explore the short-term effects of fire, we conducted a study in 2 conservation areas within the core range of the Florida bonneted bats in Southwest Florida, Babcock Webb WMA and Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge. For this, we conducted a pre-post treatment control experiment on 4 prescribed burns in 2015 and 2016. This included 1 fire in the dry season and 1 fire in the wet season for each study area. Each site of the sites was studied at 3 sites, we surveyed bat activity at 3 sites within each burn area and 3 sites adjacent to the burns as control sites. For this study, we surveyed potential burn areas every 14 days until a burn occurred. Post-burn, we surveyed the sites continuously from night 4 to night 28. Here on the right is a visual to see what the vegetation looked like pre-burn and post-burn at week 1 and week 4. We can see that we found that both Florida bonneted bat general activity and foraging activity increased across all burn treatment sites relative to control sites. More long-term, we saw the positive effect of the burn decrease significantly over the following weeks post-burn for bonneted bats. Looking at the entire bat community, we saw similar patterns with an increase in activity by all bats in burned areas relative to control sites. But unlike bonneted bats, the effect of the burn on overall bat activity did not significantly decline over the month period that we monitored. So why are we seeing this? It was neat to see these results, but the next question is why we see this happening. There were a few possibilities, including a decrease in vegetative clutter, which could either mean an increase in potential airspace volume and flight space for foraging, or increased detectability of bats by reducing potential vegetative interference with the microphone, or basically leaves covering up the microphone. So secondly, the burn could increase roosting opportunities by potentially creating dead trees or snags. Or finally, it could be increasing the amount of insect prey. Looking into these possibilities, it became clear that the amount of added airspace was not significant and that the burned understory would not affect the microphones that were already above the effective vegetation. The development of cavities would take too long to be having an effect on the short-term response and activity. This left an increase in insect prey as the most plausible reason. So prey availability is known to be an important driver for bat habitat use. A recent diet study on bonneted bats has been shown that Lepidoptera and Coleoptera to be the most prevalent insect orders for the bonneted bat diet. For example, beetles were detected in 97.8% of the samples that were analyzed. Given this, it is key to note that several coleopteran species identified as Florida bonneted bat prey items are associated with pine woodlands are suspected to be pyrophilic, or attracted to the smell of damaged pine, as you can see with this beetle with his loving bonfire. So this could be why we see a short-term increase in activity following the burns. So we also wanted to investigate the potential long-term effects of fire on Florida bonneted bats. And so to do this, we tested the effects of fire regime on bonneted bat activity. So for this, we sampled 149 sites in pine flatwoods and prairies in 2015 and 2016, stratifying by fire frequency in each of the 4 study areas. At each site, we sampled bat activity on 2 consecutive nights at 4 different times spread throughout the season. We calculated fire history variables per site in addition, using 18 years of data representing fire frequency, burn interval and time since last fire, as well as fire season, which is basically the fire frequency per season. When reflecting on how components of fire regime influence Florida bonneted bat activity, we found that fire frequency appeared to be important. Differences in fire frequency means that there are sites that are burned frequently, moderately, and very infrequently, which gives rise to very different looking communities in terms of structure and composition, as you can see here. We found that the highest activity of bonneted bats was in sites burned at moderate frequency in the early wet season and low frequency in the dry season. Feeding buzzes also showed a similar pattern to total activity. The mechanism for these findings is not very clear and could be any or a combination of the reasons I mentioned for the short-term effects. So we suggest that early wet season burns lead to an overall improvement in the habitat for bonneted bats, as it can lead to lower woody biomass, which would open up flight space, higher intensity burns, which would create more roost cavities potentially, and higher herbaceous cover and diversity, which could contribute to higher insect prey availability. So that was a lot. We've done a lot of work on this, and these studies have important takeaways from both management and theoretical perspectives for the Florida bonneted bat and the bat community overall in South Florida. Specifically, they provide critical information regarding the endangered bonneted bat to managers and policymakers currently trying to protect and manage for the species. It not only tells us more about where they're living, what habitats they're using for both movement and foraging, but also further illuminates how they might respond to relevant landscape changes, such as hydrologic restorations and prescribed fire, topics likely to become only more relevant in future years. In terms of roosting, beyond the importance of snags and available cavities, it appears that in more cluttered environments like freshwater forests and wetlands, tree and cavity height and water are key predictors for suitable roost trees, and understory airspace volume is important for more open environments such as pine flatwoods. In terms of habitat use, we found a few key variables that appear to predict bonneted bat general activity and foraging activity. This included vegetation community, hydro period, distance from nearest canal, amount of roadway, and temperature. So both of these studies demonstrate the importance of freshwater forests and wetlands for this species and emphasize that conservation of this habitat is key for the success of Florida bonneted bats. In terms of hydrologic restoration, it appears that this bat species will likely benefit from the effects associated with these hydrologic changes. From a community management standpoint, this study also demonstrates to managers how responses to restoration can differ species by species, even when they have similar morphological features, such as the Florida bonneted bat and the Brazilian free-tailed bat, which are both within that high guild. So that emphasizes the importance of species-specific management plans. And then finally, in terms of bonneted bat response to fire, it's clear that prescribed fire plays a role for this species and can be beneficial for activity. As we noted, we see short-term increases in activity immediately following prescribed burns and higher long-term usage in areas that experience moderate burns during the early wet season and low intensity burns in the dry season. There's still so much we don't know about this species, and is why continuing to study the Florida bonneted bat is so important. Studies such as these allow us to unravel the mysteries surrounding this species and craft more effective and applicable management plans to conserve populations of this unique species for generations to come. So in conclusion, we'd like to thank the following agencies, people, and funding sources. These projects were exceptionally demanding and challenging, and we never could have completed them on our own. We're so thankful to everyone who's been involved in these projects at every level. And additionally, we are actually also recruiting any tough volunteers who love swamps and want to contribute to our research efforts down in the field to learn more about Florida bonneted bat roosting habitats. So although, as you all saw, work in the field is very challenging, but we can affirm that it's also extremely rewarding and character building. So please feel free to get in contact with one of us, or Liz's email is also up there to learn more and get involved. So with that, we are happy to take any questions, and thank you all so much for listening. We really appreciate it.
That was a great presentation, guys. Thank you so much. And I'm a willing volunteer. I think, Laura, I think you have my work email. You can email me. I'm happy to help.
Wonderful. We will take all the help we can get.
All right, so we do have a few questions in the chat. Please keep the questions coming so that I don't dominate all the questions in the chat. So the first question, your coworker Jonas, he did answer it a little bit. See if you have any further comments on it. Do you know how badly Hurricane Ian has impacted any of the natural roosts?
We'll see what Jonas has already. Yeah, so I mean, so far, in the pine sites that I had mentioned in the presentation, the hurricane's path pretty much went through that area, and we have a lot of bat boxes that these that Florida bonneted bats occupy. And from what I understand, all of those bat boxes are still standing, and there are still bats
Amazingly.
in there, which is incredible because there is quite a large percentage of the overall population of this species in those bat boxes. So that's a positive. But as Jonas said, we don't know the state of our natural roosts. As we said in the presentation, they're pretty difficult to get out to, and I'm sure we'll find out in the coming months as we venture out there.
That'll be a tough couple months, I imagine. All right, so another question from Danny. Can bonneted bats be found on the east coast of Florida?
Yes, so there actually is a Miami population of Florida bonneted bats, which is really pretty neat. There's a lot of research being done through the Miami Bat Lab. And so a lot of their work can be found online, but they're doing some pretty neat work. And it's really interesting to be able to compare these populations between kind of the northern West Coast, the Southwest Coast, and then on the East Coast. And there's actually a really recent paper that was just put out about genetic differences between these populations, and it's really quite interesting. So I encourage everyone to take a look at that. Dr. Liz Bronda Torres is one of the authors on that.
So I'm going to plant a question in here before the next question. That was one of mine too. But so the bats in Miami, are they predominantly in man-made structures?
Yes, yes. So it's predominantly they're roosting in Spanish tiles, the houses with Spanish tiles they tend to like, but also there are several bat boxes that they're occupying in those areas too.
Yeah, I just think that's so fascinating and a lot of people don't know about it. So I wanted to plant that question in there. All right, so next question is that we know you've mentioned that the bonneted bats will use royal palms. Do they roost in the fronds of the palms, or do you only find them in the trunks or cavities?
Generally, they're going to be in the cavities. Like that's pretty much just in there. Like,
yeah,
will be on
exactly. So yeah, so it's predominantly cavities, especially when we're talking about large roosts. What we do find with what we call bachelors, the lone males, they're a lot less selective with their roosts. And so what we have found is that they'll roost just under kind of the loose bark of some pine trees too. But they tend to also switch roosts quite a lot too, whereas we're seeing that these big colonies of bats tend to have high fidelity towards these roosts, so that there isn't much roost switching going on, especially with female.
So when you say a big colony, like how big is a big colony of Florida bonneted bats?
Well,
that can really vary.
It does vary a lot. So I think the biggest one we found is about 80 individuals, and that's very big. But generally we're finding, between 10 and 15, or 8 and 15, so something around that range. But 80 is quite a lot, but we have seen that number.
Yeah,
and
that's
relatively small compared to like other species of bats. Like a Brazilian fur, right?
Definitely, yeah. When you compare to Brazilian freetails, they're very small colonies. So other ones will roost in hundreds of thousands in a single colony. So different vibes, country folk.
Yeah, it's just crazy how different the colony sizes are. All right, so Holly mentioned in the chat she's excited to see research in the area where she established 15 acres excited to see research in the area where I had 15 acres prior to establishment of Picayune Forest. She said it's very cool, and has a question about bat houses. How many in the Keys and parks in our area? They have seen many in the Keys and parks in our area, but they are never very successful. Can you suggest why these bat houses might not be successful?
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why bats will not occupy a bat house that you put up. Sometimes it just can take time. Like sometimes it can take like up to like 10 years for bats to move into a well-established bat house. But sometimes there's a lot of different factors, such as how much light they're getting, how close they are to other trees, whether there are other predators that are maybe hanging about in the area, whether it's posted on a tree versus on a pole, and temperature and how the bat box is built, what materials are used, how large it is, how large the cavities are. So there's like tons of different factors that come into play when kind of selecting what kind of bat box you use and where you're going to put it. And that can really affect which bat species will be attracted to that bat box and whether they'll want to come in. So we really recommend kind of reaching out to the local experts for your area, because it really can vary, you know, place by place and state by state, and for what bat species you want to attract. So yeah,
Very cool.
Bat
Thank
Conservation
you.
International has good tips on that as well.
Bat Conservation International. You said?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. No, because I talked over you, so I wanted to
No,
make
no
sure.
worries. I added.
All right.
It.
So Dr. Mark Cook says, I'm wondering if the fire-induced decrease in vegetation and resultant increase in bats might be related to predation risk at roosts. Predation by snakes, small mammals, etc., are the reason why pine flatwood specialist birds such as red-cockaded woodpeckers and other species need a healthy fire regime. The dense vegetation increases these predators and allows for easier access to roots. Perhaps another hypothesis to investigate.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, that sounds fairly complex and would require the collaboration between many ornithologists. And perhaps if you'd like to volunteer, Dr. Mark, I'm sure we'd be delighted in investigating that further.
Yeah. Ricardo Zambrano asks, are any snags left in place during restoration efforts, or are they protected during prescribed burns?
Yeah, so with the restoration, there's been a lot of work done to go in and do something with where they peep the cavities. They have these tall peeper cams, which are basically a camera and this really long pole that they'll use to look inside the cavities to see if there are any bats in there. But generally, if possible, the snags are left in place when completing the restoration. And if there are bats in there, they're definitely protected. But prescribed burns as well, I think. But Liz would know more about that as well.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes difficult to obviously manage prescribed burns and control them. So I know that some snags definitely do fall over as a result. We've had some Florida bonneted bats roost, or at least one I know of that has fallen as a result. But generally, it's a good practice, or known to try to conserve these snags where possible.
Yeah, hurricanes are kind of the biggest. Can be damaging for the snags, because they often are these, you know, there's royal palms in a lot of cases, and there's not very sturdy trees, and you're like, how is that still standing?
Yeah,
it's kind of amazing.
And lightning strikes too. That's another big one. So I just saw that Frederick, you were asking for and the email.
Oh, yeah.
So I just put our boss's email down, that you can definitely reach out to her and let her know that you'd like to volunteer. I know Jonas, our co-worker, is currently watching the presentation too, and he's the one that's going to be going out and conducting all of this important work. So he'll be delighted to have more volunteers.
Yeah, although our PI is on leave right now, so if she doesn't respond for the next 2 weeks, that is why, but we will be in touch. So thank you.
Going to be inundated with emails.
Yeah, we hope so. That'd be great.
So kind of a cool question is, where do you guys live, and how do you commute to the South Everglades?
So that is a good question. We actually right now have a remote office. We recently transplanted to another very far away in Flagstaff, Arizona. But that was, just a few weeks ago. But we've been in Florida, up in Gainesville since then. And then before that, during the field seasons, we lived in a little RV in the Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge. So we were there for 18 months during the field data collection portion of the project. So we spent 2 years collecting all that data, and then we had gosh, how many? I think we had 10 2 terabyte hard drives. We had 10 terabytes of data, or maybe 5 for that project, then an additional for the roosting. We had just terabytes on terabytes of data that we brought back up to Gainesville, and then spent the next year and a half processing and analyzing. So now we are continuing to work here remotely, the magic of remote work, and continuing to analyze the stuff in Florida. So helps us feel connected to the swamp, even if it's cold outside here.
That's awesome. It sounds very glamorous living in it. All right, so this is a really cool question. So do you know if bats get eaten by hawks or owls?
Yeah, so we have seen that happen before. We know that that is something that happens. I'm not sure how common it is.
Pretty often. It's pretty remarkable. We'd be sitting and watching the emergence count, or waiting for the emergence at these roost trees and waiting for the bats to come out, and then hear a flutter behind you, and you'd see an owl just sitting on a branch above you, also waiting for the bats to come out and to grab a snack. So you are just kind of like, oh, I hope the bats make it out okay. And sometimes they'll kind of, they'll wait if they're, hearing noises, and yeah, so it definitely happens. And especially you can watch a lot of when other bat species are coming out of more like cave environments. You'll see a lot of predators waiting outside to grab a snack. It's pretty crazy. I heard once wasn't there a skunk in a skunk in Texas that
the skunk
a skunk grabbed a bat out from, I think it was in Bracken Cave in Texas. So apparently skunks go after him too. It's pretty crazy.
But actually,
That's
thinking about it, there's the biologist at Fakahatchee who's been a biologist there for 30 something years. I remember him saying that he found a Florida bonneted bat skull in an owl pellet once.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm sure.
So that's another, but yeah, I'm not sure how frequent it is.
That's amazing. And if anybody would find that, he would.
Yeah, Mike Owen is a legend.
Yeah, Mike Owen is a legend. So there's no more questions in the chat, but I have one more question. I just think it'd be interesting for everybody to hear about. So you mentioned that male bats can sometimes, they'll be like a solitary male. So do male bats kind of hang out by themselves pretty often? Are there a lot of males in each roost?
So they actually have a really cool social structure that Liz has done a lot of research on. They have this kind of harem structure with one dominant male who's usually a lot bigger than other males, and has this what's called a gular gland that secretes this nice perfume that he wipes over his lady friends. So he basically attracts several ladies to the roost if he's lucky. But the other less dominant males, I think they'll occasionally be in the roost, but a lot of times they'll be bachelors by themselves.
Yeah, we call them bachelor pads.
Yeah.
And they'll hang out and eventually, if they're lucky, establish roosts of their own and entice their own females in. But yeah, we tend to see it's sometimes when we're catching these bats, and we'll catch we can, as Laura said, you can kind of usually tell if it's dominant or not by looking at the gular gland. So when we catch it in the net and it's not a dominant one, we're like, oh man, it's just a bachelor. Like we're just going to be, we're going to go to all this effort trudging through the swamp for a little bachelor. But of course, every roost is a huge bonus for us.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's like, oh, I just want to find 20 bats in one roost or whatever. So
yeah, especially as I mentioned, the bachelors will sometimes jump around with the roost. So you find a roost and be like, nice, there's a bat in this roost, but then you'll go back again and then there won't be any bats, and you'll go back 4, 5, 6 more times and never any more bats. So you're just like, oh, but so yeah.
We love them anyway.
We do. It's true.
Well, that's all the questions that are in the chat for right now. So I guess that's it. Thank you guys so much for presenting for us. This was really informative and really amazing. Mm-hmm. If you want to go ahead and, you can stop sharing your screen if you want. And our upcoming meeting, I'll wait till for Scott to share his screen too. Let's see. I loved all the videos you guys included. It was awesome.
A lot of fun to put together.
Yeah, all the little cartoons
thank you so much
and stuff.
For having us. Thank you so much. We've had a brilliant time.
Yeah,
this was awesome. So everybody, we will see everybody again on November 1st for Birdability. Our presenter is Freya McGregor. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. We couldn't do what we do without all of you. So have a good night, everyone.